The lobby of Brightcore Technologies smelled like fresh coffee and new carpet. Young employees hurried past the glass doors. Phones in hand, laptops under arms. A modern company. Fast. Loud. Ambitious. And in the middle of it stood Margaret Carter. Gray hair tied neatly in a bun. Soft blue cardigan. A worn leather folder held close to her chest. She moved slowly toward the elevators. Behind the reception desk, the security guard smiled. "Morning, Miss Carter." "Good morning, Daniel." Then a voice cut across the lobby. Loud. Mocking. "Well, look at this." Margaret stopped. A tall man leaned against the counter, adjusting the cuff of his expensive suit. Derek Lawson, the company's brand-new operations manager. He looked Margaret up and down, then laughed. "You're telling me she actually works here?" A few employees froze. No one spoke. Derek shook his head. "This place is trying to build the future, and we're still employing people from the last century." The silence grew heavy. Margaret felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just the quiet weight of being underestimated. She stepped toward the elevator. But Derek wasn't finished. "Let me guess," he said loudly. "Archive department?" Margaret pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open. Then she turned slightly. Her voice calm. "Before you remove something," she said softly, "you should understand why it exists." Derek smirked. "Oh, I understand perfectly." He leaned closer. "You exist because nobody had the courage to replace you." The elevator doors closed. And Derek had no idea. He had just mocked the woman who built the company he worked for. The conference room buzzed with quiet conversations. Laptops opened. Coffee cups slid across the polished table. Margaret Carter sat near the end of the room. Her notebook rested neatly in front of her. She listened more than she spoke. That had always been her way. Across the table, Derek Lawson stood beside a large digital screen. Young. Sharp suit. Perfect haircut. He looked like the kind of manager who believed speed meant intelligence. He clicked the remote. A chart appeared. Red bars everywhere. Derek sighed loudly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this company has a serious problem." Margaret felt several people glance toward her. Derek pointed at the screen. Outdated systems. Another slide appeared. Slow processes. Another. Legacy departments that refused to evolve. The room stayed quiet. Derek smiled slightly. "You know what happens to companies that cling to the past?" No one answered. "They die." A few nervous laughs floated through the room. Margaret watched the younger employees. Most looked uncomfortable. Derek changed the slide again. Now the screen showed a department list. At the bottom, Archive Operations. Derek tapped the screen. "Let's talk about this one." Margaret felt the air shift. Derek crossed his arms. "I visited the Archive department yesterday." He chuckled. "Honestly, I thought I walked into a museum. Some people looked down at their desks." Derek continued. "Paper records. Manual logs. Filing cabinets older than most of our interns." His eyes moved across the room. Then they landed on Margaret. "Miss Carter, right?" Margaret nodded once. "Yes." Derek tilted his head. "You've been here, how long?" 33 years. A few people inhaled quietly. Derek raised his eyebrows. 33. He laughed. "Well, that explains a lot." Margaret felt Maya, the junior analyst beside her, shift in her chair. Derek walked slowly around the table. "You see," he said, "Brightcore is supposed to be a technology company." He tapped the table lightly. "But some departments are still operating like it's 1995. His gaze stayed on Margaret. "Or earlier." No one spoke. Margaret folded her hands calmly. Derek leaned closer. "Tell me something, Ms. Carter." "Yes." "What exactly does the Archive department do all day?" The question hung in the air. Margaret answered simply. "We protect the company." Derek smirked. "From what?" "From forgetting." A few heads lifted. Derek laughed again. "That's poetic." Then his tone hardened. "But we have digital systems now. Digital systems can fail. Not if they're built correctly." Margaret studied him for a moment. "You'd be surprised." The room grew quiet. Derek straightened. "Well, the good news is we're fixing that." He clicked the remote again. A new slide appeared. Archive Modernization Plan. Bullet points appeared one by one. Digitize documents. Remove redundant records. Eliminate manual logs. Reduce archive staff. Margaret read the final line. Department restructuring. Maya whispered softly beside her. Oh no. Derek looked pleased. This plan will bring Bright Core into the future. He clasped his hands behind his back. Starting next week, we begin dismantling the old archive structure. Margaret finally spoke. Before you dismantle it, Derek interrupted. We've already reviewed the process. Margaret didn't raise her voice. You haven't reviewed the history. Derek's smile faded slightly. I think we'll manage. Margaret looked around the table. Many people avoided her eyes. Then she said quietly, the system exists for a reason. Derek leaned forward. So did fax machines. A few people laughed awkwardly. Margaret felt a small wave of sadness pass through her. Not for herself, for the mistake he was about to make. Derek pulled a folder from the table. Which is why, he said, I've already signed the first authorization. He placed the paper in the center of the table. Margaret read the header. Archive System Decommission Order. Effective immediately. The room fell silent. Derek picked up a pen. He signed the bottom line with a quick stroke. Then he looked directly at Margaret. Change is hard, he said. But progress always wins. Margaret closed her notebook slowly. Because Derek Lawson had just dismantled the system that protected Bright Core for 33 years. And he didn't even know it yet. But in less than a week, the company would need that system more than ever. Morning light slid through the tall windows of the archive department. Dust floated quietly in the air. Rows of tall gray cabinets lined the walls. Each one labeled. Each one organized. Each one part of a system almost no one in the company truly understood. Margaret Carter moved slowly down the aisle. Her fingers brushed across the metal labels. Contracts 1998 to 2002 Vendor Amendments, Logistics Division Client Agreements, Northern Region. 33 years of order. 33 years of memory. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Miss Carter? Margaret turned. Maya Patel stood near the doorway. The junior analyst looked nervous. Good morning, Maya. Maya stepped inside carefully, as if she were entering a library. I hope I'm not interrupting. You're not. Maya glanced around. I didn't realize how big this place was. Margaret smiled slightly. Most people don't. Maya walked between the cabinets, reading the labels. Derek says most of this will be gone soon. Margaret continued sorting a stack of folders. Yes. Maya hesitated. I don't think he understands what this department does. Margaret paused. That happens often. Maya picked up a binder. Inside were neatly typed contract summaries. Dates. Signatures. Cross-reference numbers. Maya frowned. This is incredibly detailed. Yes. But why keep physical records if everything is digital? Margaret closed a drawer softly. Because digital systems forget things. Maya laughed a little. Computers don't forget. Margaret met her eyes. They do when someone deletes the wrong file. Maya's smile faded. Before she could reply, a loud voice echoed down the hallway. Well, well. Derek Lawson stepped into the archive room. Two assistants followed behind him. He looked around with open amusement. Still looks like a museum. Maya straightened. Good morning, Derek. Derek barely acknowledged her. His eyes moved across the cabinets. You know, he said loudly, this room alone probably costs the company $500,000 a year. Margaret continued organizing folders. Records require space. Derek tapped one of the cabinets. They require modernization. He turned to Maya. We're starting the digitization process today. Maya blinked. Today? Yes. He handed her a tablet. Everything older than 15 years gets scanned. And the originals? Derek shrugged. Disposed. Maya's stomach tightened. Margaret's hands stopped moving. Disposed. Derek smiled confidently. We don't need two systems. Margaret spoke carefully. Some documents exist only here. That's why we're scanning them. Scanning doesn't preserve the legal chain. Derek rolled his eyes. Ms. Carter. His voice turned slightly impatient. This isn't the 1990s. Maya shifted uneasily. Margaret tried again. These files contain amendments, handwritten notes, witness signatures. Exactly, Derek interrupted. Messy, outdated records. He turned to Maya. Start with the logistics contracts. Maya hesitated. Some of those are older than 20 years. Derek shrugged. All the more reason to clear them out. Margaret felt a quiet heaviness settle in her chest. She had seen this before. New managers. New confidence. The belief that experience was just resistance. Derek pointed toward the far cabinets. Let's begin over there. Maya walked toward the row slowly. She opened a drawer. Inside were dozens of folders, each labeled with coded numbers. What do these codes mean? Margaret answered softly. Cross-reference markers. For what? For contracts that evolved over time. Derek laughed. Translation, complicated paperwork. Maya opened a random folder. Her eyes widened. This contract has 6 amendments. Yes, Margaret said. Each one changes the original terms. Maya flipped through the pages. Wait, these amendments aren't in the digital database. Derek waved a hand. They'll be scanned. But if the amendment dates matter legally. Derek's voice hardened. Maya. She looked up quickly. Yes. Your job is to digitize the files. He pointed at the cabinets. Not question the process. Maya swallowed. Of course. Derek turned back to Margaret. You've done your part. Margaret looked at him calmly. My part isn't finished. Derek smirked. It will be soon. Just then, footsteps rushed down the hallway. A legal assistant burst into the archive room. Her face was pale. Is Derek Lawson here? Derek turned. That would be me. She held up a printed document. We just received a legal notice. The room grew quiet. Derek frowned. From who? Northbridge Logistics. Maya looked up quickly. That's one of our biggest clients. The assistant nodded. They're claiming Brightcore violated a long-term contract. Derek crossed his arms. That's impossible. They're demanding damages. How much? The assistant hesitated. $42 million. Silence filled the archive room. Derek scoffed. This has to be a mistake. The assistant shook her head. The contract dates back 25 years. Maya slowly lowered the folder in her hands. 25 years. Her eyes drifted toward the cabinets around them. Margaret spoke quietly. Which contract? The assistant checked the notice. Northbridge Logistics Partnership Agreement. Margaret's gaze moved to a cabinet near the back wall. She recognized the code immediately. Derek exhaled sharply. Relax. He turned to Maya. Pull the contract from the digital system. Maya opened her laptop. Her fingers moved quickly. A few seconds passed. Then her brow furrowed. That's strange. Derek frowned. What? The contract is here. She scrolled. But the amendment history is incomplete. Margaret closed the cabinet drawer slowly. Because she already knew why. Derek frowned. Find the full version. Maya's voice dropped slightly. I don't think the full version is in the system. The legal assistant looked confused. What does that mean? Maya glanced around the room. Then she said quietly. It means the proof we need might only exist. She looked at Margaret. In here. Derek stared at the endless rows of cabinets. And for the first time since he arrived at Brightcore, his confidence flickered. Because the system he had just started dismantling might be the only thing that could save the company. The legal department was louder than usual. Phones rang. Voices overlapped. Papers moved across desks in nervous stacks. Margaret Carter stepped into the hallway slowly. She could feel the tension in the air. Brightcore had always been busy. But this felt different. This felt like panic. Inside the main legal conference room, the door stood half open. Maya Patel stood near the table, her laptop glowing. 3 lawyers leaned over the screen. One of them shook his head. That can't be the full contract. Maya spoke carefully. It's the only version in the digital system. Another lawyer rubbed his temples. We need the amendment history. Maya nodded. I know. The first lawyer looked frustrated. Northbridge claims the pricing clause changed in 2001. He pointed to the screen. But this version doesn't show that amendment. A second lawyer leaned back. If the amendment exists, they win the case. The room went quiet. Margaret stepped inside. Good morning. Several heads turned. Maya looked relieved. Ms. Carter. One of the lawyers sighed. Please tell me the archive department has more records. Margaret folded her hands. That depends. The lawyer frowned. On what? On whether those records still exist. Maya glanced toward the door. Derek Lawson entered the room. His confident stride had slowed slightly. What's the situation? The first lawyer spoke immediately. Northbridge claims we violated the pricing agreement. Derek frowned. That's ridiculous. The lawyer tapped the table. They say a 2001 amendment reduced their shipping costs. Derek crossed his arms. Then we'll show the contract. We tried. He gestured to Maya's laptop. The amendment isn't in the system. Derek turned to Maya. Then it was never signed. Margaret spoke quietly. Or it wasn't digitized. Derek sighed. Here we go. One of the lawyers looked between them. Ms. Carter, do the physical archives contain older amendments? Yes. The lawyer straightened. Then we need them. Derek raised a hand. Hold on. He turned toward Margaret. You're telling me the only copy of this contract might exist in a filing cabinet? Margaret answered calmly. Possibly. Derek laughed once. This is exactly what I've been talking about. The lawyers exchanged uneasy looks. Derek walked slowly around the table. Outdated systems. He gestured toward Maya's laptop. A modern company shouldn't depend on paper records. Margaret didn't react. One lawyer spoke carefully. With respect, Derek, if the document exists, we need it. Derek stopped walking. And if it doesn't? The lawyer hesitated. Then Northbridge's claim stands. Silence filled the room. $42 million. Maya glanced toward Margaret. Margaret said nothing. She simply watched Derek. He leaned against the table. Fine. He pointed toward the hallway. Check the archive department. The lawyer looked relieved. Thank you. But Derek wasn't finished. However, everyone looked at him. If the document isn't there, this proves my point. He turned toward Margaret. Your system failed. Margaret met his gaze. My system hasn't been checked yet. Derek smirked. Well, let's find out. Minutes later, the group entered the archive department. Lawyers, assistants, Maya, and Derek. Rows of metal cabinets surrounded them. The lawyers looked overwhelmed. Where do we start? Margaret walked toward a cabinet near the back. Her steps slow but confident. She opened a drawer. Inside were dozens of neatly labeled folders. Maya watched closely. How do you know where everything is? Margaret pointed to the codes on the folders. Every contract has a cross-reference chain. The lawyers leaned closer. Margaret pulled out a folder. Northbridge Logistics, Partnership Agreement. She placed it on the table. The first lawyer opened it quickly. Pages flipped. Signatures. Dates. Original terms. Then he stopped. This is the base contract. He looked up. But the amendment from 2001 isn't here. Maya frowned. That's impossible. Margaret remained calm. Check the amendment log. The lawyer turned to the back pages. His eyes scanned the list. Then he paused. There's a reference here. He pointed to a code. A6/secondary amendment file. The lawyer looked confused. What does that mean? Margaret stepped toward another cabinet. She opened a different drawer. But the folder she expected wasn't there. She checked again. Still empty. Her stomach tightened slightly. Maya noticed. What is it? Margaret spoke carefully. That file should be here. Derek crossed his arms. Well, Margaret checked the label again. The number was correct. But the folder was gone. The lawyer's voice dropped. If that amendment exists, we need it. Maya looked at Derek. Did anything get moved during the digitization? Derek shrugged. Possibly. Margaret slowly closed the drawer. Because she already knew the truth. The file had been relocated. Under Derek's new restructuring order. The first lawyer spoke urgently. We need proof of that amendment within 24 hours. Derek looked irritated. Why the rush? The lawyer stared at him. Because the judge will force a settlement if we can't produce it. Derek frowned. How much? The lawyer answered quietly. $42 million. Silence filled the archive room. Maya looked at Margaret. Margaret said nothing. But inside her mind, one thought echoed. The document still existed. She was certain of it. The problem was, it had just been moved somewhere no one else knew. And the clock had started. 24 hours. Or Brightcore would lose the case. And Derek Lawson would learn exactly why the archive system had existed for 33 years. The archive room felt smaller now. Too many people. Too much tension. The lawyers stood near the long table, flipping through folders that suddenly seemed useless. Maya watched their faces change with every page. Hope. Confusion. Frustration. Derek Lawson stood near the doorway with his arms crossed. His patience was thinning. This is exactly what I meant, he said. A chaotic system no one understands. Margaret Carter said nothing. She walked slowly back toward the cabinet she had opened earlier. Her fingers rested on the metal handle. Maya followed her. Ms. Carter, where would the amendment normally be? Margaret opened the drawer again. The empty space still stared back at her. It should be here. But it isn't. No. Maya lowered her voice. Did someone move it? Margaret thought for a moment. Yes. Who? Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed the drawer carefully. Across the room, one of the lawyers spoke urgently. We can't defend the company without that amendment. Another lawyer added. Northbridge's legal team already submitted their version. Derek looked irritated. Then they'll have to prove it. The first lawyer shook his head. They already did. Silence spread across the room. Maya felt the pressure building like a storm. She turned back to Margaret. You said there was a cross-reference chain. Yes. Can we follow it? Margaret nodded slowly. Possibly. Derek overheard them. Good, he said. Then follow it. Margaret stepped toward another cabinet along the far wall. This one was older. The metal darker. A small brass lock hung from the handle. Maya noticed immediately. That one's locked. Yes. Why? Margaret reached into her cardigan pocket. She pulled out a small silver key. Because some records require restricted access. Derek frowned. Restricted? Margaret inserted the key. Legal chain protection. The cabinet clicked open. Inside were slimmer folders. Older paper. Handwritten notes. Maya leaned closer. This looks different. Margaret removed a folder labeled Northbridge Logistics Amendment Index. She placed it gently on the table. The lawyers gathered around quickly. One of them flipped through the pages. His eyes moved fast. Then he stopped. Here. Everyone leaned closer. He pointed to a line written in blue ink. Amendment A6, filed under Executive Contract Protection. The lawyer looked up. Where is that? Margaret's eyes moved slowly across the room. To another cabinet. Smaller. Gray. Locked. Maya followed her gaze. That cabinet? Margaret nodded once. Derek walked over. What's so special about this one? Margaret spoke calmly. It contains protected contract amendments. Protected from who? From being lost. Derek grabbed the cabinet handle. It didn't move. Locked again. Margaret stepped forward. But before she could reach it, Derek noticed a bright orange sticker on the side. He leaned closer. His brow furrowed. What's this? Maya stepped beside him. The sticker read, Document disposal scheduled. Her stomach dropped. What does that mean? Margaret felt the cold realization settle into her chest. Derek read the smaller line underneath. Archive clearance, authorized under Modernization Directive. His directive. The room grew very quiet. One of the lawyers asked slowly, When is the disposal scheduled? Maya's voice came out barely above a whisper. Tomorrow morning. The lawyer's face drained of color. Are you serious? Derek straightened quickly. That doesn't mean anything. Margaret finally spoke. That cabinet contains protected amendments. Derek waved a hand dismissively. Then they'll be scanned first. Margaret looked directly at him. Scanning doesn't preserve the legal chain. Derek's jaw tightened. You keep saying that. Because it's true. One of the lawyers stepped forward. If the amendment we need is inside that cabinet, we cannot destroy those documents. Derek turned sharply. No one said we're destroying them. Maya pointed to the sticker. It literally says disposal. Derek looked at the label again. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. The lawyer spoke again. Can you open the cabinet? Margaret reached for the handle. But she stopped. This one requires a second key. Where is it? Margaret met Derek's eyes. In the executive authorization box. Derek frowned. What box? The one created when you signed the restructuring order. Silence. The realization spread slowly. The second key had been moved. Under Derek's new system. Maya felt her pulse quicken. How do we get it? Margaret answered quietly. We request executive access. The lawyer looked toward Derek. Well, Derek hesitated. For the first time since he arrived at Bright Core, he looked unsure. Finally he said, Fine. He turned toward the door. I'll get the authorization. Margaret watched him leave. The lawyers returned to the table, whispering urgently. Maya leaned closer to Margaret. Do you think the amendment is in that cabinet? Margaret nodded slowly. I'm certain. Maya exhaled. Then we're safe. Margaret didn't answer. Because she knew something Maya didn't. The cabinet hadn't been opened since Derek's restructuring order. And if the disposal team followed the schedule, those documents would be shredded at sunrise, including the one that could save the company. And the second key was still locked inside the executive office Derek now controlled. The hallway outside the executive offices felt unusually quiet. Too quiet. Maya Patel stood beside Margaret Carter near the elevator doors. Her fingers tapped nervously against her tablet. "Do you think he'll actually bring the key?" Maya asked. Margaret adjusted the strap of her worn leather folder. "I hope so." Maya exhaled slowly. "Because if that amendment is in that cabinet, we can stop the lawsuit." Margaret nodded. "Yes." But something in her voice felt distant. Like a warning. The elevator doors opened. Derek Lawson stepped out, a thin black case in his hand. He walked toward them with quick steps. "Well," he said, "this better be worth the interruption." Maya straightened. "The lawyers think the amendment is inside the locked cabinet." Derek stopped walking. "And if it isn't?" Maya hesitated. "Then the company could lose the case." Derek looked unimpressed. "Or Northbridge is bluffing." Margaret spoke calmly. "Companies rarely bluff when $42 million is involved." Derek stared at her for a moment. Then he opened the case. Inside was a small key. "Executive access authorization," he said. He closed the case again. "Let's get this over with." Minutes later, they were back inside the archive room. The lawyers looked up immediately. "Do you have it?" one asked. Derek lifted the key slightly. "Yes." Margaret stepped toward the locked cabinet. The bright orange disposal sticker still clung to the metal. Maya's heart beat faster. Margaret inserted the first key. Then Derek handed her the second. 2 locks. 2 clicks. The cabinet door opened slowly. Inside were 3 narrow shelves, each one filled with protected contract files. The lawyers rushed closer. "Find the Northbridge Amendment," one said. Margaret scanned the labels carefully. Her fingers moved across the folders. A. 1 Executive Amendment A. 3 Legal Revision A. 4 Witness Confirmation. Then she stopped. There was a gap. A narrow empty space between 2 files. Margaret's stomach tightened. Maya noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" Margaret looked again. The label beside the empty slot read, A. 6 Secondary Amendment File. The file was gone. One of the lawyers spoke sharply. "Where is it?" Margaret didn't answer. She checked the shelf again. Then the lower shelf. Still nothing. Maya felt the fear rising. "That's the amendment we need." Derek stepped closer. "You're telling me the one document we're looking for just disappeared?" Margaret kept searching, her movements calm but focused. "It should be here." "Well, it isn't." The lawyer turned toward Derek. "Has anyone accessed this cabinet recently?" Derek shrugged. "I just unlocked it." The lawyer pointed at the shelves. "Someone removed that file." Maya felt the room grow colder. Maybe it was moved during digitization? Derek frowned. No one had access to this cabinet. Margaret finally spoke. "Someone did." Everyone looked at her. "The disposal team." Maya's eyes widened. "They started preparing the cabinets yesterday." The lawyer slammed his palm lightly on the table. "Are you serious?" Margaret nodded. "They were instructed to sort protected documents for scanning." Derek looked defensive. "That doesn't mean they took anything." Margaret reached into the cabinet again. This time she pulled out a thin binder. Inside were handwritten archive logs. Dates. Signatures. Transfer notes. She flipped through the pages slowly. Maya leaned closer. "What are you looking for?" "The movement record." A moment passed. Then Margaret stopped on a page. Her finger touched a line of ink. Maya read the entry. A. 6 Amendment File, transferred for processing. Her voice dropped. "Processing where?" Margaret turned the page. Another note appeared. Archive clearance preparation. The lawyer's voice sharpened. "Where are those files now?" Margaret closed the binder gently. "In the disposal staging room." Maya felt her pulse race. "That's where they prepare documents for shredding." The lawyer stared at Derek. "Tell me the shredding hasn't started." Derek looked uneasy. "It shouldn't start until tomorrow." Margaret spoke quietly. "Preparation starts the night before." Maya grabbed her tablet. "The staging room is on the lower level." The lawyer moved toward the door. "Then we need to go there right now." Derek hesitated. "This is getting ridiculous." The lawyer turned back sharply. $42 million is ridiculous." Derek clenched his jaw. But he followed them. The group hurried down the hallway. Elevator doors opened. Closed. descended. The lower-level corridor was colder. Industrial lights hummed overhead. At the end of the hall stood a large metal door. A sign above it read, "Document Processing." Maya pushed the door open. Inside were long tables, stacks of boxes, and rows of documents waiting for shredding. Margaret walked slowly forward, her eyes scanning the piles, looking for a single file. One piece of paper that could save the company. Behind her, Derek crossed his arms. "You're chasing ghosts." Margaret didn't respond. She stopped beside a stack of gray folders. Her fingers hovered above them. Then she said quietly, "The amendment is here." The lawyer stepped closer. "Where?" Margaret looked at the massive piles of documents waiting for destruction, and spoke the words that froze the room. "Somewhere inside these boxes." Because the file that could save Bright Core was already seconds away from being shredded. The document processing room felt colder than the rest of the building. Fluorescent lights hummed above the long tables. Boxes of old files were stacked in tall rows, each labeled, each waiting for the shredding machines across the room. Maya Patel stared at the piles. Her stomach twisted. "There are hundreds of files here." One of the lawyers exhaled sharply. "We don't have time to check everything." Across the room, a large shredder sat silent. For now. Margaret Carter stepped slowly toward the tables. Her eyes moved across the labels. She knew the system. She had built it, but now the system had been broken. Derek Lawson leaned against the doorway. "This is pointless," he said. Margaret ignored him. She lifted the lid from the nearest box. Inside were folders bound with red straps. She checked the labels quickly. Vendor agreements. Supplier invoices. Wrong section. Maya opened another box. Nothing here. The lawyer checked a third. Still nothing. Derek sighed loudly. "You're wasting time." Margaret straightened. "No." She turned toward him. "We're fixing your mistake." The room fell silent. Derek's eyes hardened. "My mistake? You ordered the clearance. That was modernization. You dismantled a legal chain." Derek stepped forward. "Your system is outdated." Margaret met his gaze calmly. "And it just saved this company for 33 years. Before Derek could respond, the door opened. Several people turned. A tall man walked into the room. Dark suit. Silver hair. Sharp eyes. The room immediately grew quiet. CEO Thomas Grayson. The lawyers straightened instantly. "Mr. Grayson." The CEO looked around slowly. "What exactly is happening down here?" No one answered at first. Then one of the lawyers spoke. "Sir, we're searching for the Northbridge Amendment." The CEO's brow furrowed. "The one from 2001? "Yes." "And it's not in the system?" Maya shook her head. "No, sir." Grayson looked toward Derek. "Why?" Derek shifted slightly. "We're in the middle of archive modernization." Grayson's voice turned colder. "Modernization?" "Yes." Grayson gestured to the stacks of boxes. "You call this modernization?" Derek straightened. "We're replacing outdated systems." The CEO looked at Margaret. "Ms. Carter." Margaret nodded politely. "Mr. Grayson, how long have you worked here?" 33 years. Grayson looked around the room again. Then he asked a simple question. "Who built the archive system?" The room went quiet. Maya glanced toward Margaret. Derek answered first. "I believe it evolved over time." Grayson's eyes moved slowly toward him. "Did it?" No one spoke. The CEO stepped closer to the tables. His gaze landed on the boxes. "Strange thing about memory," he said quietly. People leaned in. "Companies forget their past very easily." He picked up a folder, then placed it down again. "But some people remember." His eyes rested on Margaret. "I remember when this company started." Maya looked surprised. Grayson continued. "One small office. 3 employees. One computer that barely worked." He looked around the room. "And no systems." His voice softened slightly. "Except one." The lawyers exchanged glances. Grayson pointed gently toward Margaret. "She built it." The words hung in the air. Maya blinked. "You mean?" Grayson nodded. "Every contract structure. Every cross-reference chain. Every archive log." He looked at Derek. "Margaret Carter designed the backbone of this company." Derek's face tightened. "That may have been useful decades ago, but..." Grayson cut him off. "Useful?" His voice sharpened. "That system kept this company alive when we couldn't afford lawyers." Silence spread across the room. Grayson stepped closer to the boxes again. So tell me something. He looked at Derek. Who authorized the destruction of those records? Derek hesitated. I did. Grayson nodded slowly. And the amendment we're looking for? Margaret answered quietly. Was transferred here during the clearance preparation. Grayson looked at the mountains of boxes. How many documents are scheduled for shredding? Maya checked her tablet. Approximately 6,000. Grayson's eyes darkened. And one of them could save us $42 million. Yes. Derek spoke quickly. We'll find it. Grayson turned toward him. You'd better. Then he looked back at Margaret. Do you know where to start? Margaret studied the stacks. Her mind moved through decades of filing patterns. Then she nodded. Yes. Maya leaned forward. How? Margaret pointed to a group of boxes near the far wall. The disposal team organizes files by archive code. The lawyer frowned. And? Margaret spoke calmly. The amendment we need is part of the A series. She began walking toward the far corner. Everyone followed. The boxes were stacked 3 rows high, each marked with thick black numbers. Margaret stopped at the middle stack. She lifted one lid. Inside were red-tagged files. Her hand moved carefully through them. Then she paused. Maya held her breath. Did you find it? Margaret slowly pulled out a thin gray folder. The label read, A5 Executive Contract Revision. Not the right one, but close. Very close. Margaret placed it aside, then opened the next box. More red tags. More amendments. Her fingers moved faster now. Searching. Scanning. Then suddenly, she stopped. Her hand hovered above a single folder. The label partially visible beneath another stack. Maya leaned closer. What is it? Margaret lifted the top file, revealing the one beneath. The code printed on the tab made the lawyer gasp. A6 Secondary Amendment. The document they needed. But before anyone could celebrate, Margaret noticed something else. A bright red sticker on the corner of the folder. Shredding priority. And across the room, the shredding machine suddenly powered on. The shredding machine roared to life. A deep mechanical growl filled the processing room. Maya flinched. The noise felt too loud. Too final. Across the room, a worker in a gray uniform stepped toward the machine. He adjusted a stack of documents waiting beside the feeder slot. Margaret Carter tightened her grip on the folder in her hand. A6 Secondary Amendment. The file that could save Brightcore. But the red sticker still glared from the corner. Shredding priority. Maya whispered quickly. Ms. Carter, that's it, right? Margaret nodded once. Yes. One of the lawyers stepped forward. Open it. Margaret placed the folder on the metal table. Her hands moved slowly. Carefully. The room gathered around her. CEO Thomas Grayson stood beside the table. Derek Lawson remained near the doorway. Watching. Waiting. Margaret lifted the cover. Inside were several yellowed pages. Original contract language. Handwritten notes in blue ink. Witness signatures. The lawyer leaned closer. Find the clause. Margaret turned the first page. Then the second. The room stayed silent except for the growl of the shredder. Finally she stopped. Her finger rested on a paragraph halfway down the page. Maya leaned closer. What does it say? Margaret read quietly. Effective January 2001 revised pricing structure applies under Amendment A6. The lawyer's eyes widened. That's it. He grabbed the page carefully, scanning the details. Look at the signatures. Maya leaned closer. 2 names sat at the bottom. Northbridge Executive Approval. Brightcore Authorization. Stamped. Witnessed. Legally binding. The lawyer looked up. This proves Brightcore followed the agreement. Relief rushed through the room. Maya let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Then we win the case? The lawyer nodded slowly. Yes. But Derek spoke from the doorway. Are we sure? Everyone looked at him. Derek stepped forward, his expression tight. That document hasn't been verified yet. The lawyer frowned. It's clearly signed. Derek crossed his arms. Old paper records can be forged. The room went still. Maya stared at him. You think she forged it? Derek shrugged slightly. I'm saying we should be cautious. Margaret didn't react. She simply turned another page in the folder. More notes. More cross-references. Then she stopped again. Her finger pointed to a small code written near the margin. The lawyer leaned closer. What's that? Margaret spoke calmly. The verification chain. Maya frowned. What does that mean? Margaret closed the folder halfway. This amendment wasn't just filed. It was cross-registered. With what? The lawyer asked. Margaret looked toward the far wall. Another cabinet stood there. Smaller. Gray. Maya followed her gaze. Another file? Margaret nodded. The witness ledger. Derek frowned. You're telling me there's another document? Margaret answered quietly. Yes. Why? To prove authenticity. The lawyer looked impressed. That's actually brilliant. Margaret didn't smile. It was necessary. Maya hurried toward the cabinet. She opened the drawer. Inside was a thick black book. Handwritten entries filled the pages. Dates. Witnesses. Contract references. Maya carried it back carefully. Margaret opened it. Her fingers moved down the page. Then stopped. She pointed. There. The lawyer leaned over her shoulder. Amendment A6, verified January 2001. Below it were two witness signatures. One from a legal officer. The other from a company founder. CEO Thomas Grayson leaned closer. His eyes widened slightly. That's my signature. Maya blinked. You signed it. Grayson nodded slowly. I remember this meeting. The lawyer straightened. That settles it. He held up the amendment page. This document is authentic. Relief filled the room. But Derek still looked uneasy. Grayson turned toward him. You had doubts. Derek shifted slightly. I was just being thorough. Grayson's voice grew firm. Your thoroughness nearly destroyed the one system protecting this company. Silence spread through the room. The lawyer carefully placed the amendment back inside the folder. We'll deliver this to the court immediately. Maya smiled slightly. So the lawsuit is over? The lawyer nodded. Yes. But Grayson spoke again. Not quite. Everyone looked at him. He turned toward Derek. This situation deserves a conversation. Derek stiffened. Grayson continued calmly. In front of the entire company. Maya blinked. You mean? Grayson nodded. An all-staff meeting. The room grew quiet. Derek's face tightened. Grayson turned back toward Margaret. You've been protecting this company for 3 decades. Margaret said softly. I was doing my job. Grayson looked around the room. And tomorrow morning, everyone here will understand exactly what that job was. Across the room, the shredding machine finally powered down. The growl faded. Silence returned. But something in the building had changed. Because the truth about Margaret Carter, and the mistake Derek Lawson made, was about to be revealed to the entire company. The Brightcore atrium had never been this full. Employees crowded the glass balcony levels. Rows of chairs filled the floor. Conversations buzzed through the room. Everyone knew something unusual was happening. The message from the CEO had been short. Mandatory all-staff meeting. No explanation. Just a time. And now hundreds of employees waited beneath the tall skylight. Maya Patel stood near the front with the legal team. Her eyes kept drifting toward the stage. Do you know what he's going to say? She whispered. One of the lawyers shook his head. No idea. Across the room, Derek Lawson stood stiffly beside several department managers. His jaw looked tight. His arms crossed. Like a man waiting for a storm. The murmuring crowd suddenly quieted. CEO Thomas Grayson stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. Grayson looked out over the employees for a long moment. Then he spoke. Good morning. His voice echoed through the atrium. Yesterday, Brightcore faced a legal threat. A ripple moved through the crowd. Grayson continued. A lawsuit from one of our oldest clients. Employees glanced at each other. Grayson raised a small folder. The case could have cost this company $42 million. Gasps spread across the room. Grayson nodded slowly. Yes. It was serious. Maya watched Derek from the corner of her eye. His expression stayed carefully neutral. Grayson continued. Our legal team searched every digital record we had. He paused. They found nothing. The silence deepened. Then Grayson lifted the folder slightly. Until someone remembered where the real record was kept. His eyes moved across the room, finally stopping near the front row. Margaret Carter. Hundreds of heads turned. Margaret sat quietly in a simple chair near the aisle. Her hands folded in her lap. She looked surprised by the attention. Grayson gestured gently. Would you join me? Margaret stood slowly. The walk to the stage felt longer than usual. The room watched her. Some curious. Some confused. Some whispering. Maya smiled softly as Margaret climbed the steps. Grayson waited until she stood beside him. Then he faced the audience again. Many of you don't know Margaret. More whispers. That's understandable. He looked toward the back rows. She works in the archive department. A few employees exchanged puzzled looks. Grayson continued. Yesterday, Margaret located a document our entire legal team couldn't find. He held up the amendment page. This document proves Brightcore followed a contract signed 24 years ago. The lawyers nodded from the front row. Grayson's voice grew stronger. It saved this company $42 million. A wave of surprised murmurs spread through the atrium. But Grayson wasn't finished. However, he said quietly, that isn't the most important part. The room leaned in. Grayson looked directly at Margaret. Then back at the employees. 33 years ago, Brightcore was not the company you see today. He gestured around the towering glass offices. We had no building. No legal department. No systems. His voice softened slightly. We barely had a business. The room stayed silent. Grayson continued. 3 people worked in a small office with folding desks. He paused. And none of us understood how to organize a growing company. Maya felt the weight of the moment building. Grayson pointed gently toward Margaret. She did. Whispers filled the room again. Grayson raised a hand for quiet. Margaret Carter built the archive system when Brightcore had nothing. He looked around the crowd. Every contract structure. Every cross-reference system. Every legal safeguard. He lifted the amendment folder. All of it came from the system she designed. The room grew completely still. Employees looked at Margaret with new eyes. Grayson continued. For 33 years, that system protected this company. His voice hardened slightly. Even when people forgot why it existed. Maya glanced toward Derek. His face had gone pale. Grayson spoke again. Recently, the archive department was scheduled for dismantling. A murmur spread through the crowd. Grayson turned his head slightly, looking directly toward Derek Lawson. The reasoning was that the system was outdated. Derek shifted where he stood. Grayson continued calmly. Yesterday, that outdated system prevented a $42 million loss. The crowd erupted in whispers. Grayson waited for the noise to settle. Then he said one final sentence. Sometimes the people we overlook. He looked at Margaret. Are the ones holding everything together. The atrium fell silent again. Grayson stepped closer to the microphone. And now, he said quietly, we need to talk about how this happened. Across the room, every eye slowly turned toward Derek Lawson. The atrium felt heavier now. Not with noise, but with attention. All eyes slowly turned toward Derek Lawson. He stood near the back of the stage area. His confident posture from weeks ago was gone. Grayson stepped forward. Derek. His voice was calm, but firm. Yes, sir, Derek replied. Grayson held the amendment folder in his hand. This document survived because of Margaret's system. He paused. But it almost didn't. The room stayed silent. Grayson continued. Your modernization order triggered the transfer of protected files. Maya felt her stomach tighten. Grayson looked directly at Derek. You authorized the clearance of archived materials without reviewing the legal chain. Derek swallowed. I believed the department was inefficient. Grayson nodded slowly. I understand wanting improvement. Then his tone changed. But improvement does not mean destruction. The words echoed softly through the atrium. Grayson raised the amendment page slightly. If this file had been shredded, he looked around the room. Brightcore would have lost this case. Murmurs spread again. Grayson turned back to Derek. And that decision was yours. Derek's jaw tightened. I was trying to move the company forward. Grayson responded quietly. Forward should never mean blind. Silence. Then Grayson continued. There is another issue. The room grew still. Margaret was publicly dismissed and mocked during meetings. Employees shifted uncomfortably. Grayson's eyes remained steady. Experience was treated as weakness. He looked across the crowd. That mindset cannot exist here. Derek looked down for the first time. Maya watched him carefully. Grayson spoke again. Leadership is not about age. It is about responsibility. He paused. And responsibility requires humility. The legal director stepped forward. With your permission, sir, the board has recommended an internal review. Grayson nodded. That review begins today. The room felt electric. Grayson turned slightly toward Derek. You will cooperate fully. Yes, sir. And until the review is complete. Grayson's voice remained steady. Your operational authority is suspended. A collective breath moved through the crowd. Maya blinked. Derek's face tightened, but he did not argue. Grayson looked back at the employees. This company will not tolerate decisions that endanger its foundation. Then he gestured toward Margaret. And it will not ignore the people who built it. The crowd began to clap. Slow at first. Then stronger. Margaret looked surprised by the applause. She raised her hands slightly, almost unsure how to respond. Grayson stepped aside. Margaret Carter. He addressed the room. On behalf of Brightcore Technologies. He paused. Thank you. The applause grew louder. Some employees stood. Maya joined them. So did the legal team. Margaret's eyes glistened slightly. Not from pride, but from relief. For years she had worked quietly, often unnoticed. Now the room saw her differently. After the meeting ended, employees approached her one by one. Thank you. I had no idea. You saved us. Margaret responded to each person calmly. No one person saves a company. She smiled gently. It was teamwork. Meanwhile, Derek stood near the edge of the room. He felt the weight of every glance. Some were neutral. Some disappointed. But none hostile. Grayson approached him quietly. Derek. Yes, sir. I want you to understand something. Derek looked up. Yes. Grayson's voice softened slightly. You showed ambition. Derek nodded. But ambition without respect becomes harm. Silence followed. Grayson continued. You will have the opportunity to learn from this. Derek exhaled slowly. I understand. Grayson placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. Good. Later that afternoon, Margaret sat back in the archive department. The room felt different now. Maya entered quietly. Everyone is talking about you. Margaret smiled. That is not necessary. Maya shook her head. It is. She paused. Thank you for not giving up on the system. Margaret looked around at the cabinets. I built it to protect the company. And it did. Margaret nodded. Yes. Maya hesitated. Are you okay? Margaret thought for a moment. She felt tired, but not defeated. I am. Maya smiled. Good. Across the building, the board meeting began. An internal review team assembled documents. Derek prepared statements. The company moved forward carefully. No one celebrated loudly, because justice was not about victory. It was about correction. By evening, Grayson issued a company-wide message. It stated clearly, Margaret Carter would lead a legacy systems advisory team. Her archive structure would be preserved and modernized carefully, not dismantled. Employees read the announcement quietly. Some felt embarrassed. Others felt grateful. Margaret received the email in her inbox. She read it once, then closed the laptop. She leaned back in her chair. 33 years. Not wasted. Not ignored. Just finally recognized. The next morning, as sunlight entered through the glass windows, Maya walked past the archive room. She saw Margaret organizing files calmly. Same routine. Same focus. But now, when employees passed by, they slowed down. They nodded respectfully. Some even asked questions about the system. Margaret answered patiently, because she had always believed in the work. Derek, meanwhile, attended the review sessions. He listened. He learned. And slowly he began to understand something important. Leadership was not about proving others wrong. It was about protecting what others built. Inside the archive room, Margaret placed a final folder back into its cabinet. She closed the door gently. Not as someone who had won, but as someone who had fulfilled her purpose. And this time, when she walked through the company lobby, no one called her old. They called her respected. And Brightcore would never forget the system that saved it.